Hello makers, and welcome to Share Stitchery. I'm Catherine Harris, and if you're new here, I do sewing and DIY tutorials each week. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. This week, I wanted to share with you a fun pattern hack to the Beatrix bag pattern, which was recently released by Share Stitchery. I'll leave a link to where you can grab that down below. Now with this hack, I show you how to use some quilting cotton and some panel prints, as well as some borders to add in to create this bag. And I've got a little extra special spot where we look at doing English paper piecing, but not by hand, which does happen to be one of my favorite ways of doing it. We actually look at doing 1-inch hexie English paper piecing by machine. And this will give you perfect corners every time, and it saves you a ton. Now, I mean a ton of time, enabling you to whip up this bag in a weekend or possibly even an afternoon if you're a quick sewer. So let's get on to that tutorial.
Bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum.
So we're going to start with the exterior panels. So I've cut out the panels from the Northcott Fabrics BEEKIND collection, and it's just slightly too small on the large one here for this pattern piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some borders, and this beautiful border print that comes with it, I am going to add to one of the panels. So I'm just taking off the salved edge here, and then I am just going to freehand with my rotary cutter cut the strips of the border. And I think that I really like the look of this bee border, and to have one of the panels be sort of solid black with that bumblebee print. So I'm just going to cut out 2 of these strips, which will act as the strips going down either side to lengthen this to where it needs to be. So I am just going to line this up, and I want my bees facing inwards on both sides, so I do have to stagger them on either end. And then I'm just going to trim it to make sure that they are both in the same place before I start to pin them together. And now I have to remove a small portion of the panel right here, just so that the border fits onto the size of the pattern. So you're just going to take whichever border you selected, and you are going to add that, including your seam allowances, to that pattern piece, and then remove what that extra is off of that main panel. Depending on which panel and border you choose, those measurements are going to be slightly different. Next, I am just pinning this right sides together and then trimming off the bottom. And I'm going to do the same for the other side here. And once it is all done being pinned, I am going to pop on over to the machine and stitch that in place with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And so I'm just stitching down here. Next, I am going to press those seam allowances out towards that border print. And then I've placed my pattern piece on here, and I'm now trimming the top and the bottom of my panel because it is slightly too tall. And next up, I have decided to do some border panels around this smaller piece here, and I really enjoy this quote. And so I'm doing the exact same thing with the yellow stripping to create this border panel. And so I'm doing one on either side, but I'm also going to add this panel to the top as well. So then once I'm done doing the 2 sides, then I'm going to add a border panel to the top and the bottom, which will run the full length of the top and the bottom piece. And then I'm just going to stitch that in place. And once again, I'm going to press these seam allowances towards the border print. And that's what that will look like so far. And now we're on to the 1-inch hexies done by machine. So you're going to get out your template here, and I've got this lovely acrylic template, and I will link where I got mine down below. That being said, you could also use a paper template and just mark out those 1/4 inch seam allowances, which is what I'm doing here with these dots. They actually have the markings right where you need them to be, so that when you match them up from corner to corner, you're going to stitch in between those markings, leaving that 1/4 inch seam allowance unstitched. And so you can see I'm just placing my template back on, and I'm adding to the other hexie my stitching lines where I'm going to be stitching from. And so you can see right here, it is open at the bottom just slightly. I'm just finger pressing them open so that they lay nicely. And on each one of your hexies, you're going to want to mark where those 1/4 inch seam allowances are. And I will leave a download for some hexie forms that you can print out, and you can really make these in any size. And next, I put my needle down and I'm starting where that dot is. I'm doing a back stitch, and then I'm ending right where that dot is, and then doing another back stitch. So you're going to back stitch at the start and the end of each of those stitching lines. And then you're going to continue to do your full row, which would be the length of how long your panel is going to be for the finished bag, so that bag piece. Next, I'm cutting these in half because the top of my panel is a straight edge and I don't need to have a full hexie. So I can actually get more fabric out of this by just doing a half hexie. And you're going to stitch them together the exact same way you would. And then you're just going to fold it in on itself and then stitch again along the side. And you're always going to want to stitch leaving like in between those two dots. And then once again, we're going to start here. And when you're already starting in the chain, you're actually starting in the exact same spot that you had left off before. So you can see that there is a seam there already. We're going to be starting there. And once you have that all stitched in place, then you can stitch these tiny little straight pieces going up, and that creates the top of our panel. Now, because we have a square going in the middle, we don't need to piece any more big long rows together. We just need to do another half piece, which is where that panel is going to come up at the top, just like so. But we do have some room on either side, and I want to have some hexies go down that side as well. So I think that I need about 2 or 3 hexies to accommodate that pattern piece. Obviously, we're going to trim some away after. But we're just going to create this staggered piece. And you can see this one that I'm adding here. Later, you'll find that this ended up being 3 on one side, and it was probably 1 too many. But once you have them all stitched in place, then you can go ahead and use some best press or starch alternative to starch and press it. Now, if you take a look at the back side, I've got all of my seams going upwards in the same direction. Now we're going to be attaching the main panel. So to attach this panel, I am just going to mark my 1/4 inch seam allowances on either side of the panel. Now I'm eyeballing this as I'm going down here because I don't necessarily need to use a template or measure it. I've done so many 1/4 inch seam allowances. Next, the way we're going to attach it, you are going to attach it coming on the top panel side here. So you're just going to line it up right sides together. And an easy way to go about doing this is just flipping it upside down, matching up those raw edges, and then stitching it in place. But remember to stitch only up to that seam allowance, that 1/4 inch seam allowance, so between those 2 dots. Panel will look just like this. You just need to finger press, don't need to go to the iron quite yet. Now next, to get the other side, you're going to flip it over and then just flip that one side over. Make sure your panel isn't twisted. And then you're almost creating like a little burrito right here. So you can see it's creating a bit of a tube here. And that's how we're going to get the bottom attached. So we're just going to pin this in place along that straight edge. And then you also want to be very careful on ensuring that it is centered. So I am just measuring here how far in on either side from those side hexies my panel is, so it's not going slightly askew and it is straight. So pin and stitch in place between those 2 dots, leaving that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now that becomes incredibly important here. So when we flip it over on itself, we need to clip this hexie, and we're going to clip all the way up to where that seam allowance started, so where we had attached that one panel. And so I'm just clipping on a diagonal and then clipping away that excess, because now it allows us to have that room to lay this panel flat and stitch it across here. So we're just going to pin that in place and stitch using that 1/4 inch seam allowance in between those 2 dots, and then trim down your seam allowance to 1/4 of an inch. And then we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So we're just going to flip right sides together. And quick little review here. We are going to take our scissors and we're going to snip on a diagonal up to that point where we had stitched the top and the bottom. Do not go through that point. And then we are going to lay it nice and flat, pin and stitch in place, and do not forget to backstitch at both the start and the end to secure those stitches. So I know in quilting you do a lot of chain stitching and you tend not to backstitch. It's very crucial that you do backstitch when you're doing this sewing method. So once it's all pinned, let's stitch it up, and then we can trim down that extra hexies on the side here so everything lies nice and flat. And then we can pop it over to our ironing station and give it a nice good press. And I am pushing all of the seam allowances towards those border prints once again. Now I'm not using a press cloth so that you can see what I'm doing, but if I was making this as a gift for someone, I would use a press cloth. Now we're going to put the bag together. So this is all very similar to in the regular Beatrix bag pattern, but we're going to do some quilting on here. And I'm just going to quilt outside the panels here. I've also quilted along those border prints just to kind of hold things in place. You can do a lot more quilting if you like as well. I also quilted my bottom panel with a nice geometric grid, and then my side panels, I did some nice lines going through here. Then I have added on my tabs going along the top, and I'm using fabric tabs for this one. And I've just stitched those in place. And now for the two-toned straps. So I've decided to also use that border print to create some two-toned straps. Now, in order to fold those straps so you don't have any raw edges showing, we need to create some fabric to do that. So I'm taking two pieces of fabric, and I'm just using some scrap fabric that I had, and I am going to attach them with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And we're essentially going to be creating a strip that we can fold in on itself. And I decided to use this cream fabric, which is the same as my handles, and create an accent. So I actually folded it out to create this accent going along the top. That being said, if you folded it right back to where that fold line was, you wouldn't have that accent, and it would be the same size as the strap underneath. And that being said, I do quite like having a little bit of that cream accent piece. And so once it's all pressed, we're going to take our straps from the regular pattern, ensure that you do interface that with a medium to heavyweight interfacing to ensure they are stable. And just as we did in the Beatrix pattern, we are going to fold our straps just like you would fold bias tape to create a nice sturdy strap. So I'm just going to press these in. And once we have these straps pressed in half and no raw edges are showing, then we can look at attaching them together. So the next thing that we are going to do, I'm just going to trim off some of my excess here, and then I'm going to attach these together. Now, because I added that border strip, I have a little white strip that has a bit of an accent going along the top of my strap. If you didn't add the border strip and you decided to use the green border, it's going to fit the strap perfectly. So I've just pinned along here, and I have stitched those in place, and our straps are all ready to get attached. So now we're going to put it all together. So we have our bag outer completed. And next for the inner, because it is cotton, we're just going to fold those edges under as opposed to binding it like you would with a vinyl, and just stitch it in place. So much easier. In this instance, I decided to do 2 large pockets on either side and no divider in the middle. And in order to attach our main piece for the recessed zipper, makes it a lot easier without the divider. You just need to go down 2 inches and then place right sides together for that zipper divider and stitch that in place. So I've just got it here. You can see my zipper is face down, so it's actually facing right side of my lining. And then I'm going to stitch down along that 2-inch mark. And this is what the panel will look like right now with the lining. Next, we are just going to add in our side pieces. Now, I decided to show this because I didn't show this in the regular Beatrix bag example because I did do that center piece. But this is how you would stitch it together if you were not doing a center piece. And next, we are just going to do the base, and the base I did line with a heavyweight interfacing on the lining as well, and you might want to double it up just so that you have a decent amount of structure on the bottom of this bag. Next, you're going to leave an opening, and that is what I had drawn in here because that's how we're going to turn our bag out. So you're going to start in either of the corners here, and you're just going to clip that in place and then just go around the entire base of the lining, and then you can stitch it in place, ensuring that you're leaving that opening, and the opening is about 10 inches wide, so it's a decent size opening. And I just want to show you when I get to the corners, I stop a 1/4 inch away from the edge, or what happens to be the center of my seam. Then I'm going to flip it down, place my needle down right where I had left off, or a 1/4 inch away from that seam allowance, and then I'm going to continue stitching. This enables you to have beautiful boxed corners while stitching in the base. And then I'm just going to flip it. I just wanted to show you this a couple of times because I know that it can be a little bit difficult to get those corners just right. And there's my opening. So once we have that all stitched in place and you have the opening, you are going to flip your lining right side out. And then you want to ensure that that top of the lining is right at the top, and you've pushed the zipper down, because that is what we are going to attach the bag to. I've placed my bag inside out, and then with right sides together, I'm going to match up the top of the bag. Now this is the exact same steps as in the regular Beatrix bag. So you're just going to match up those corners, clip them all in place, and then you're going to stitch all the way around the top of the bag. And with this, you just want to make sure that you are pressing out your seams, especially with this, because I did actually use a quilt batting because I wanted to quilt this bag. So I didn't use a soft and stable interfacing with it. I used a heavyweight interfacing with quilt batting, and you really want to make sure you press those out. Now you can turn your bag right side out, and then you're going to fold under in the lining and then stitch that closed. And it should look like that. And then we can just pop it back inside our bag, and the inside should look like this. And now we've just got to do a couple more finishing touches before our bag is done. So you're going to pop over to your pressing station, and you are going to press the top down. So you want to curve the inside of that recessed zipper gusset down so you don't see it from the outside of your tote bag. And we are just going to use a bit of steam, and then we are going to top stitch that in place, and it should look like this from the outside. Next, we're going to attach those fabric straps. So you're going to want to adjust them to a size that suits you, fold it in half, and then I just zigzagged my straps on like so. And this is what it looks like when it is all done. And now for the reveal. So now that we have the bag all completed, I thought I would chat with you a little bit about what my inspiration was for this. And it was actually this beautiful fabric here from Northcott Fabrics, and it is called Be Kind, and it was designed by Jade Mosinski, and she is an illustrator that specializes in intricate line drawings and came up with this beautiful bumblebee design, which I used to hack this pattern. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever done machine quilting English paper piecing hexies? How did it go for you? Until next time, makers, let's get our sewspiration on.